Hi there. My name's Lynn Keddie and I paint expressively. I love painting. I've painted for years and also love sharing the process with like-minded artists who really want to develop this skill. Is it a skill? I don't know. I just think it's disappearing into yourself and not criticizing your work and experimenting. It's super fun. I absolutely love it. Today, I'm going to share with you how I painted this painting here. Um, there we go. Can you see it? I had so much fun painting it. So buckle up and let's see how it went. Hello and welcome. My name's Lynn Keddie and I'm an expressive painter. What does that mean? Well, it just means that instead of painting from life and trying to make a scene or whatever I'm painting look realistic and what it actually looks like in real life, I paint using my imagination and memories, and sometimes the memories come from all sorts of different places. Today I'm painting a landscape, at least that's what I started out doing. But what I try and do is sort of divorce myself from the outcome. I don't want to try and paint something that's in my head. What I want to do is I just want to play with paint and see where it takes me. Now, I've been painting for a very long time, many, many years. In fact, when I was a small child, it was the only thing I loved to do. Every lesson was dreary as far as I was concerned, apart from when the paints came out, or something creative at any rate. And it sort of stayed with me for a very long time. I fought very hard as a teenager to continue with my art, but my father was a scientist, and I think he thought that I should do something proper. And he tried very hard, and I'm sure it was for my own good, or at least he thought so, for me to do a science subject, lots of science subjects, which I was actually really hopeless at. But even though I ended up doing a science degree, would you believe, I still used to draw quite a lot. And I ended up working in business, but initially as a business analyst. Would you believe that was with numbers? And I was always hopeless with numbers at school and university. But I worked with a great team and I learnt an awful lot and got to travel quite a bit. And that led me into a job as a publisher of magazines, which I absolutely loved. Back in the day when magazines were really a fantastic industry to be in, I could work with creatives and also the business side of things, I suppose. But after a few years of doing that, although I really loved it, I just felt that I needed to do something different. And I took this incredible and slightly weird jump from working as a magazine publisher to being an editorial photographer. And the reason I did it was I loved gardens. I absolutely adored gardens and I loved gardening. And I just thought, well, I can do that because my dad, bless his cotton socks, also loved photography. He was very technical about it, but he always bought me cameras. So I always had a camera and I just used to I just snap pictures. And I realised that what I was doing when I was taking photographs, particularly when I started doing it as a profession, was that I would take a photograph and then I'd recompose it and take another photograph. And the first photograph is always the best. And I realised I was actually looking at shapes rather than the detail. And I think that's where the painting took me. So because that was a freelance job, I had time to start painting again. And I took it up and really loved it. First of all, I was painting in watercolours, and I remember, I remember I was in a little painting group, and we used to paint from these photographs, which weren't very good. And there was one which was really annoying because it was of a boat, and it was in a harbour, and the mast was cut off and it was landscape and it should have been portrait. And I was sort of a bit annoyed about the whole thing. So I completely changed it. And I'm gonna post a picture of what I painted in the end. I loved it. I completely got lost in the whole process and used funny colours and just really enjoyed it. And that was the moment, I think, that I reconnected again with painting. So here I am with my acrylics now. I did paint for a while in oils, and I love oils, but they take such a long time to dry. And that was very frustrating. And I didn't really understand acrylics terribly well. And I wanted them to behave like oils, but of course they don't because they dry so quickly. And then over time, I realised that actually acrylics are marvellous for expressive painting because of the fact that they dry so quickly, that you can build up layers over time. So in this painting, as you can see, I'm painting very quickly. I often paint very quickly. I find that once I get going, and it can be a bit slow at the beginning, I must admit, once I get going, I just love the sense of mixing the paint and applying it to whatever surface I'm working on. I often work on wood, and in this case, I'm working on a piece of I think it's MDF, and I have given it a couple of coats of gesso. Although as I started, I realised what I should have done, and I didn't think about it stupidly, was I wanted a very dark background in the bottom so that I could scrape into that and have line marks that were sort of coming through the fresher paint on top, which is why all of a sudden I started painting in quite a dark foreground. So what do I think about when I'm painting? I don't really think about painting anything specific. So if I'm painting trees, for example, I will just think about a tree that I think's interesting maybe, or looking out of my window in my studio and seeing the trees outside, and I just look at the colours and the shapes, and it doesn't even have to be a real landscape. It's just places that I'm very familiar with. So I live in Somerset, and it's a really beautiful county. I lived in Wiltshire for a while, also a beautiful county. That's in the south of England, the southwest of England. But my best piece of advice to you is that wherever you live, even if you live in a town or a city, just be very mindful of what is going on around you and of the colours and the shapes and the energy, if that makes any sense. I absolutely dive into it when I'm walking my dog or driving through the countryside, and particularly at this time of year in autumn or the fall, when you see the colours changing and drifting from green to beautiful buttery yellows and vibrant reds. It's fantastic. And then sometimes when you see the sun shining through and the blue sky behind it and then the very dark trunks, it's just magical. It just brings your senses alive. I was kind of thinking that's what I wanted to paint when I started this, but in actual fact, today is a very sort of grey day, and I just started painting a kind of a autumnal scene that's quite grey, but I quite like the colours. I've got Prussian blue in there, which is a colour I don't often use, but if you mix it with raw umber, and actually I discovered if you mix it with alizarin crimson, you get a lovely grey, and then with alizarin crimson you get a beautiful, beautiful deep purple, and that's where I'm getting my tonal values from mixing those colours. I don't often use black. I don't have a problem with it, but I love mixing colours together to get chromatic blacks, and those are blacks that are made from basically colours. So what I'm doing here is I'm sort of building up layers. I've painted in the sky. I may go back to it, but I need to get some foreground in. The marks are really, really loose. I'm not really thinking I need to paint a bush or I need to paint a wall or anything like that. I'm just playing with paint and trying to get more layers of paint so that when you see a scene in the countryside, for example, you'll see the foreground, or the foreground, and then you'll see layers behind it, and then you might see the sun lighting up grass behind that, and that's what I'm trying to build up so that it doesn't feel one-dimensional. I'm using a palette knife quite a lot on this painting. I started off with a brush, but I really enjoy using a palette knife. I also use a silicone spatula, which is kind of similar. It's a kitchen implement or tool, but I really like using it. It's very pliable, and it works very well when you're painting on wood. So what am I thinking about? Well, I'm just enjoying myself now. I'm feeling it's working. I like the sort of gloomy, distant look that you've got from a very few marks that I've made, and it feels very much like what I'm feeling the weather is like today and the walks that I've been on today. So that's what I'd say to you, is really observe everything, the different colours that you get, and try and commit them to memory. Sometimes I take photographs just as a reminder of what I've been looking at. But very often I'll just gaze at things and just see if I can absorb it. And I find that if I don't try to paint something that I've actually seen, then the results are more exciting. They're more exciting, and they tend to work better. I think if you want to paint expressively, it's kind of important to really be brave. Try and make marks and leave them, because if you keep going back to them, you lose the spontaneity, you lose the freshness. And that's the beauty, I think, of expressive painting, is that it comes from your soul. It doesn't come from your brain ticking over and saying, that's not right, that's not right, that's not right, which is what we do all the time. You're telling yourself off saying, oh no, that doesn't look right. What I try and do is I just try and keep moving quickly across the canvas, or in this case the wood, and just layering up to see how things are going. And, do try different colour mixes. My tip for not getting muddy colours, because I know a lot of people in my workshop say, oh, my colours are really muddy, is first of all, use lots of different brushes. The advantage of using a palette knife is that you can wipe your palette knife clean. But if you use lots of different brushes, you can pretty much keep each brush for a sort of a mix of colour, and you're not cleaning your brush out in your water all the time. So if you do that, you end up with muddy water, and that then transfers into the paint that you're working with. So that's my best tip for keeping your colours fresh. Use lots of brushes, or use a palette knife and wipe it in between mixing colours. You will get better at doing that the more you practice. And that's my second tip. Practice, practice, practice. I often have people in workshops, and sometimes they say, oh, I haven't picked up a paintbrush for 6 months. And I think, well, how are you ever going to get better? When I was a kid, I learnt the piano, how to play the piano, and I had to practice every day for about half an hour. And I did get better, I got to grade 5, and then I gave it up as soon as I could. But I could play the piano. I could play it reasonably well. And the only reason I got to that point was that I practiced. I practiced my chords, I practiced my scales, I practiced the music pieces I was given. And the more that you practice, the less you think about the technique. And that's the key as well with painting. Learn the techniques, learn the rules, then forget about all of it, because by that stage you will not have to worry about how you mix the perfect green or whatever, or worry about composition, because you'll be able to handle all of that. You'll recognise where something isn't going right. The other key piece of advice I'd give you, which is something that took me a while to learn, and that is understanding tonal differences. So that's the difference between the lights and the darks in a piece. I've noticed with myself and with people in workshops that we all quite often seem to naturally tend towards midtones. It's quite difficult to judge tonal values in colour. It's very easy to do it in black and white, but in colour it's a lot trickier. So I always encourage people to push in dark colours, as I'm doing here. I've just dried off the piece because it's quite wet, and I was using a very, very small, what's called a rigger brush, to paint in some of those very fine, delicate lines of vegetation in the foreground. That's really to bring the piece to life, because those dark marks give the whole piece a lot of depth and more excitement and more richness, which is what you're after. You don't want to feel as though you've got one plane of colour. One way of working this out is to photograph your piece and desaturate it in your photo app on your phone. And then you'll clearly be able to see where, if there are enough tonal differences, that you've got enough lights versus darks. You obviously do need midtones, they are important, but you need the whole range, and it has to be balanced across the painting so that you don't end up with a lot of dark, very tonal differences in one area of the painting and then the rest of it's all a bit wishy-washy. The one caveat to that tip with the phone is that modern phones very often tinker with your photograph to make it look better, which is great, but it means that you're not really in control. So do watch out for that. And another way of working out the differences in tonal values is if you just squint your eyes, and if you're seeing sort of no big differences, then that's a problem and you can address it. I'm going to show you now, because this painting is well on its way to being finished. I'm just going to stop now and show you how this looks in black and white. It's interesting, isn't it? You can really start to see if it's going to work when you do that. So another great tip that I've learned along the way when painting, particularly expressively, is I think it was Brian Rutenberg, the American artist, who said this, or somebody that he knew, and it's a great, great tip, and that is start like a builder and finish like a jeweller. What do I mean by that, or what did he mean by that? Well, it means lay down paint quickly at the beginning. Block out the shapes that you see. Choose some colours that you think are going to work. Try and have a limited palette so you're not worrying about what colours to do what with. And then as the piece starts to take shape, as you identify the tonal differences and if they're working or not, and that the composition is working and that you're feeling satisfied with it, gradually the changes that you make are much smaller, they're more delicate, they're more refined. What you're really doing is just finishing off the piece, and you don't want to change things necessarily dramatically. With this piece, I have stopped for about an hour and left it just to partly let it dry, partly to let it sit, partly for me to have a think about where I want to go with it. I photographed it, and if you look at your painting as a photograph, you will see things that aren't right. It's incredible. I'm not quite sure what the neuroscience is behind that, but there obviously is some, because I can always spot problems in a photograph, which I can't necessarily see when I'm just the painting staring at me in the face. If you leave your painting for a few days, it also helps. You kind of distance yourself from it and you can be much more objective about what needs to be done. So I've just gone back into this and I'm really just adding lots of tiny wiggly marks, that's the only way I can describe it, to represent sort of vegetation, but also sort of energy. I painted this painting once, and it was of springtime, and I had been sitting at an exhibition in the courtyard and watching spring unfold around me, and the swallows arrived, and they were just swooping around this courtyard through this walnut tree with the leaves unfurling. And I thought, how am I going to paint swallows? Because I didn't want to paint the actual swallows. And I just got my rigger brush and some light coloured paint, and I did these swirls around the whole painting, and it really felt like that there were birds flying around. And so I kind of use that element in my painting now because I think it just adds layers of depth to the painting, and I really like doing it anyway. So this is just a mix of alizarin crimson and Prussian blue to get a very, very dark purple, which actually looks almost black. But it brings the painting to life. If you've been enjoying this, do subscribe, it really helps my channel, and also share this with your friends. And another piece of news for you is that I have been putting together an online course really, I suppose, on expressive painting. It's actually on this channel if you go to my playlist, you'll find it on my playlist. It's called Expressive Acrylic Painting for Beginners, or something like that, can't quite remember. And I've done 5 videos so far. They're just about things that are useful to know, paints, materials, that kind of thing. And then I'm going to go on to composition and colour mixing and working out how to express yourself, methods that I use. The great thing about it is that it's free. It's absolutely free. All you have to do is to just watch the videos and enjoy them. And hopefully you'll find them useful. And if there are any questions that you have, please feel free to add them to the comments and I can come back to you and help you out. And if you want to share any of your work, I would love to see it. It's great looking at other artists' work. I love it. So this is the painting after the first stage, when I left it for a little while, and this is the final painting. So how do you know when a painting's finished? Well, I think the best thing to do is to get to a stage and leave it. Stop fussing, because you can overpaint and ruin a painting. I've done it myself, so I know. So the thing to do is to stop even before you even think it's finished and just leave it for a while. And if you take a photograph of it and you feel happy with it, then it's probably finished. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, I'll see you again soon. Bye for now. This is my book, How to Paint Flowers Expressively in Acrylics. It's available on Amazon, and there are links in the description.